Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Conflict Zone, your go-to source for insightful discussions on international affairs, law, and security. I'm your host, Dr.Christian Barrientos Ichaso, and today we have a truly exceptional episode lined up for you. We're diving deep into the heart of the matter, exploring the unfolding events in Ukraine and shedding light on the expertise of a distinguished journalist who has covered such critical international conflicts. Our featured guest needs no introduction to those who closely follow military and intelligence matters. With an impressive career spanning numerous renowned media outlets, Martin Arostegui stands as a beacon of experience and knowledge in his field. Martin Arostegui's remarkable career. Martin Arostegui is not just a journalist, but a seasoned war correspondent who has ventured into the heart of conflict zones to bring us the stories that shape our understanding of global events. He's been a voice for the voiceless, reporting on the complexities and nuances of international conflicts that mirror the current situation unfolding in Ukraine. Arostegui's byline has graced the pages of reputable publications such as Voice of America, The Wall Street Journal, The Daily Telegraph, The Washington Times, CNN, FOX News, UPI, and France 24. His reporting has provided invaluable insights into the world of military operations, intelligence strategies, and geopolitical dynamics. Twilight Warriors, exploring military special operations. But Martin Arostegui's influence doesn't end with his reporting. He is also an accomplished author, having penned the enlightening book Twilight Warriors. This book delves into the world of military special operations, shining a light on the brave men and women who undertake covert missions to ensure our security. Analyzing the situation in Ukraine. Today, we're fortunate to have Martin Arostegui with us, providing his expertise on the developing situation in Ukraine. As tensions rise and international concerns mount, Arostegui's insights will offer a deeper understanding of the complexities at play and the potential implications for global stability. A message from Dr.Christian Barrientos Ichaso. Before we kick off our conversation, I'd like to take a moment to express my gratitude to our audience. Your support, subscriptions, and engagement keep our mission alive to foster awareness and understanding of critical international matters. As an international company and business lawyer, I am deeply committed to sharing insights on international law, security, compliance, anti-corruption measures, tackling crime, and facilitating smooth trade relations. Stay connected. So whether you're an avid follower of international affairs, a business professional navigating the complexities of global trade, or someone seeking clarity amidst the chaos of international conflicts, podcast The Conflict Zone is your destination for accurate information and informed discussions. Ladies and gentlemen, grab your notepads, ready your questions, and get ready for an illuminating conversation with the one and only Martin Arostegui. Stay tuned because you won't want to miss a single moment of this episode. Thank you for joining us, and let's dive right into the heart of the matter.
Thank you, Intelligent Artificial. Where we start, Martin?
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Christian. And wow, that was quite a presentation. I think I'm getting to like. I think I like artificial intelligence. They're being very nice to me. Thank you. I hope I live up to their expectations or to their presentation. Anyway, yeah, Christian, it's nice to be with you again. It's been a while. I am taking the opportunity of coming back on your podcast because I am, as I told you, I'm now in Ukraine. And in fact, I wrote a very extensive article from Odessa, where I am right now, for the Diario Las Americas, the Miami paper for the Latin American and Hispanic world. It's a very good newspaper, by the way. And we are about the situation. I am focusing it, of course, where I am geographically, where I am right now, which is the port of Odessa. It's southern Ukraine. It's the southern coast of Ukraine, which borders on Moldavia and Romania. And I think this is an area which may become increasingly critical as the war goes on. In fact, I would say that the fate of Ukraine as a viable state and as a viable economy may well depend on what happens here. We have a lot on, obviously on the counteroffensive, which, is not going too well, depending on who you listen to. The Russians say the whole thing's a failure. The Ukrainians saying they are gaining ground. European intelligence services and observers are on the fence about it. Some say it's going well, some say it's not going well. I'm telling you, US analysts in Washington are not at all optimistic. But regardless of how that goes, regardless of whether Ukraine is or is not able to recover substantial territory, and right now it looks like they won't be able to recover anything very substantial. What happens here in the Odessa, in the southern coastline, which is dominated by this old historic port city of Odessa, and the neighboring states could well decide what happens in Ukraine, and I'll explain that in a moment. Since Ukraine launched its counteroffensive beginning middle of last June, Russia got out of a treaty or an agreement they had signed with Ukraine under a lot of pressure from China, of course, and African countries on whom Russia is increasingly allied with, to allow grain shipments out of Odessa. Now, Ukraine is one of the world's largest producers of grains, wheat, barley, you name it. And especially a lot of third world markets are highly dependent on this grain, as well as European markets, by the way. And under international pressure, Putin signed to an agreement by which he would allow grain shipments to keep coming out of being exported out of Ukrainian ports. Since Ukraine launched the counteroffensive, one of Putin's countermeasures has been to get out to nix this agreement. He's out of it. He's no longer respecting it. He said that and he's now blockading Odessa. He's blockading Ukraine's southern ports. So the grain can no longer get out. This, of course, is not only very bad for the international markets. I think the price of grain has gone up about 5% since Russia got out of this agreement. And it's now the only way out for Ukrainian grain. Their routes through Poland and so on, but through Baltic ports, that's a very complicated, long, and expensive route. The only viable way that Ukraine can get any major volume of grain out of to international markets is through the Danube. The Danube River, which runs across Ukraine and runs down through Moldavia, Romania, and through Romania into Romanian Black Sea port of Constanța. And that is how Ukraine is trying or managing to get out its grain. Russia, however, has now increased its missile and drone attacks using Iranian Shaheds, Iranian 136 Shaheds, which it's now producing in a military-industrial agreement with Iran. They're being produced in Russia and also being sent up from Iran in very large numbers, which are these suicide drones. They are these loitering munitions. You send them over an objective and they loiter the area until whoever is guiding them finds the objective they want, and they're sent down as kamikaze to blow up, to destroy whatever it is they're looking for. And he's using these in increasing quantities against Odessa, against another port on the Black Sea called Nikolaev. And now, very recently, over the past month, at least on 2 or 3 occasions, against Ukraine's Danube ports. One is called Ismail, and there are another one or two whose names I don't remember right now, but the main one is Ismail. This is right. They practically have to cross Moldavian airspace, and Moldavia has no air defense system. It's not a member of NATO. It's not under any kind of NATO protection. So it's Ismail and the Danube ports are fair game for the Russian drone attacks. And he has blown up millions of tons of grains. I think in Ismail, he destroyed all the grain storage facilities there. He did the same in Odessa. And an official of the Ukrainian Agriculture Ministry that I spoke with the other day says that they've lost about 70 to 80% of their production over the past few weeks. I mean, I was from where I am in Ukraine right now, in Odessa, I could see, I had a ringside view of a Russian missile barrage and drone barrage on Odessa, which was, it went on for hours. There were two or three waves of Iranian Shaheds and Russian anti-ship missiles, which, actually, it's amazing. The Ukrainian anti-aircraft defense system is very, very good. And in fact, I saw an entire line of drones being taken out, at least half a dozen exploding in the night sky, one after another. One missile, however, from a submarine did hit. It hit a commercial center. We don't know if that was a target, but that's where it fell. And of course, it totally destroyed the commercial center. It was at nighttime. It was closed. There's a curfew here, by which everything closes at night. And I realized why. And so nobody got killed, fortunately. But yeah, basically, you've got to understand it's an interesting feature of this. Russia is using its anti-ship missiles, which are those that are stationed in submarines. And they are, of course, programmed to hit objects of a lot of metal density in the sea, where I think it's activated by a kind of remote control magnet system. And to see it works, obviously the ship is the only, when you're targeting a ship, it's the only metal object on the sea, large metal object. But of course, when they start sending this against a city, against an urban area like Odessa, it can be attracted by all sorts of targets. And in fact, it hit the church, it hit the main Odessa cathedral, it also hit a bank building, it hit a monastery. And what explained to me is that because monasteries and churches, these Russian Orthodox churches in Odessa, have these domes made of, sort of very metallic, very dense metallic domes. You've seen these golden domes which adorn these Russian Orthodox churches. It attracts these missiles. That's why two churches were hit. And of course, the bank building was hit because it had more metal density than a target near the port, which was probably the target. It was a group of cranes. And I think the bank building had more aluminum and metal and steel, and that's, so the missile went there. Anyway, this is just a curious anecdote, interesting anecdote of what is happening here, and how destructive these missile barrages can be, and the extent of collateral damage they can cause. So this is the situation, and it's very uncertain. In fact, coming up, I came to Ukraine through Moldova. I spent some time in Chisinau, and I spoke to a security expert there who tells me that the Moldovans are very concerned, because of course they're not protected by NATO. They're not a member of NATO, and it would be very difficult constitutionally for them to become a member of NATO at the moment. And so they're very vulnerable to any kind of Russian attack. And their ports, their Danube ports, are part of the chain of ports that go down the Danube. One is called Giurgiuleț, which is very close to Ismail, which would have got hit the other day. And they're beginning to, thinking of strengthening their air defense systems. I believe he told me they're acquiring radars from some European countries to maybe incorporate into their existing anti-aircraft cannon systems, which are pretty rudimentary. They're left over from the old Soviet Union when Moldova was part of the Warsaw Pact. But you're still at a very elementary stage, so they're very vulnerable to any kind of Russian attack. They've also got a province called Transnistria, which borders Ukraine, and where you have 2,000 to 3,000 Russian troops stationed. It's a pro-Russian province of Moldova. And through an agreement since the time of the dissolution of the Soviet Union and the Warsaw Pact, Russia has maintained a garrison in Transnistria, even though Moldova is no longer an ally of Russia. But it's there, and they could easily at any moment cut off rail links from the main from Odessa and other areas of Ukraine where the grain gets collected to the Danube ports, to Ismail and the other ports on the Danube, from where they try to move it to Romania, to Romanian ports. So that's another worry. They could cut off. There's a highway connection there that's very close to Transnistria. There's a railway connection as well. So that is also a kind of sword of Damocles, a threat hovering over Moldavia and Ukraine that the Russians can activate at any moment. Now the deal is, once the grain gets to Romania, then it moves through Romanian and Bulgarian waters down to the Bosphorus, down to the Straits of the Bosphorus, controlled by Turkey. And from there, it can move on out to the Mediterranean and to markets in North Africa and in Europe. It'll be hard although the Russians, to some extent, well, they have to respect Romanian waters unless they want to get into a direct conflict with NATO. If they attack anything within Romanian territory or Bulgarian territory, it automatically activates Article 5. And but even so, I mean, they've been very aggressive. I mean, even though they let out a Chinese, interestingly enough, they allowed a temporary corridor to open up from Odessa last week, which was mainly to let out. I think the main reason the Russians allowed it was because there was a very large Chinese, Hong Kong registered cargo ship, one of these large container cargo ships, stuck in Odessa. It was stuck here for several months. So they decided the Chinese, of course, pressured Russia to let this go, and they did. But they stopped two other they've stopped two other cargo ships in the Black Sea recently, supposedly because they were under suspicion of bringing arms to Ukraine. That's their excuse, that's their pretext for interfering with ship traffic in the Black Sea, or anything that they suspect is going to Ukraine. One of the cargo ships is actually on its way to Romania, I believe. But yeah, no, they are enforcing their blockade of Ukraine quite aggressively, and the Ukraine port, the Odessa port, is shut. It's shut down for all effects and purposes. That's the government considers it shut down, except for very exceptional circumstances like allowing out this Chinese container vessel. Elsewhere in the conflict, I probably should talk a little bit about the counteroffensive. I don't think the news is good, to be very honest with you, Christian. The reports you get is that it's not a failure, but the type of breakthrough that the Ukrainians hope to accomplish with the new supply of Leopard tanks and American Bradley and Stryker fighting vehicles and so on that they had received hasn't worked. I mean, I think it's rumored. I mean, I think Russian estimates of Ukrainian casualties are wildly exaggerated. I think we're talking about 45 Ukrainian dead or wounded, thousands of tanks and armored personnel carriers destroyed, and so on. I think that's exaggerated, but there's no question that at least the initial, the shock unit, the division sent initially to try to crack through the very thick Russian defenses and minefields. You're talking about thousands of square kilometers of minefields. I think one observer said it's the mined area is equivalent to the entire state of Florida that they have to get through. Was a failure. I think they got stuck in the minefield. They couldn't move, and at least one tank column was totally destroyed and was fair game for these very effective Russian gunship helicopters, the Ka-42, which shoots a guided anti-tank, anti-armor missiles. So that I think that certainly that aspect of the offensive, the idea that we're going to do a strong punch and manage to crack through a major Russian lines in a sort of blitzkrieg certainly has not worked. The Ukrainians, I believe, are now working on small unit tactics. They're using company-sized, maybe platoon-sized even, units of their more elite troops to try to cut through the minefields surreptitiously, capture Russian trenches, and gradually erode the Russian position. But you're talking about a very long-term strategy, which may or may not work. They're using, interesting enough, what is working, what does appear to be working to some extent, is that they're using their Marines, trained by the British Royal Marines, to use the river routes inside that connect the Ukraine with the occupied parts of Ukraine under Russian control, to move special Marine units to operate through the rivers, take control of certain locations along the rivers inside Russian territory. And they have had some success in doing this. Of course, you're not talking about it's difficult at this stage to say if that, in effect, gives them a major breakthrough inside Russian lines. I don't think so, but there is something there. I mean, there is continued movement there, which appears to be having some degree, even if a very limited degree, of success. And of course, the Ukrainian strategy is to be able to get into the occupied territory, either by cracking through the defenses or now perhaps more asymmetrical way, to disrupt Russian logistics and leave these fortified positions with thousands of troops isolated or cut off from their supply bases and their supply systems. So that, who knows, in the long term that may work, or at least put them in a very strong negotiating position, which, if, as I believe, and as a very high-level Ukrainian ex-NATO, army colonel who actually has worked as a Ukrainian attaché with NATO says, is the eventual will be the only eventual way of putting an end to this war. Who gets more of the negotiation? We don't know yet, but some kind of negotiated solution, as I've said all along from the very beginning of our podcasts, I think is ultimately inevitable. Very few believe now that Ukraine will be able to push out the Russians by purely military means. I don't think that's going to happen. The only way that could conceivably happen, it would be with massive air support from NATO, from the West, which has not been forthcoming. I mean, the F-16s that the U.S. that Zelensky has been trying to get from the United States, and which Biden said would be delivered soon, are not going to be delivered anytime soon. I think the date being put now was not until next year. So, scrap that. I mean, they're not going to have F-16s. That people have suggested A-10 Warthogs, which are especially designed for anti-tank ground support aircraft. For some reason, they have been offered. I don't understand why. And the only thing Ukraine has managed to get has been some Russian Su-24 aircraft from other, or through, at least through other ex-Warsaw Pact countries, which are capable of delivering, they surface platforms to deliver long-range missiles, which have been hitting some pretty important targets in Crimea and in the southern part of Ukraine, command posts, hardened pillboxes, that kind of thing. But these are an insufficient number, and the extent to which this can actually be a game changer at this point is quite questionable. So that's the situation as far as the sort of the battlefield and overall tactical and strategic assessment is concerned on Ukraine at the moment. It doesn't look very good. In fact, NATO, the thing is that increasingly inside NATO itself, in the United States in particular, in the US Congress, and even within NATO, there are officials now increasingly saying that they've got to negotiate with Russia, that a military solution is not possible. Of course, the Ukrainians are very upset about this. They released a pretty strong statement yesterday countermanding someone in NATO who said this. And but this is right now pretty much the thinking, I think, in Washington and in Brussels. Maybe not London, but certainly Washington and Brussels.
That's incredible. That is a low intensity war, a long time too. But this is the conclusion. This is the finish of the podcast. Thank you for subscribe. You can contribute more, or that's all. Dear Martin.
Thank you, Christian.
Thank you, Martin. You're a special report in the middle of the war. Thank you. Thank you all for subscribing and sharing this video, this podcast of the conflict zone. Thank you, Martin. See you.
Thank you, Christian. See you later.
See you
Take
later.
care. Bye.